Now we have a not only fascinating but controversial interview for you guys, so I'm rather looking forward to it. New York Times correspondent Thanasis Kambanis wrote a new book called A Privilege to Die, Inside Hezbollah's Legions and Their Endless War Against Israel. Thanasis, welcome to the Young Turks.
Great to be with you.
All right, great to have you here. So first, let's give background on how you covered Hezbollah. Where did you go? When did you go? And who did you talk to?
Well, I went to cover the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah in South Lebanon, and I basically was either lucky or stupid, depending on your perspective. What I did was I drove to the border of South Lebanon and Israel in search of Hezbollah. I figured if I wanted to find Hezbollah and Hezbollah's fighters, the place to go would be where the fighting was taking place. And I proceeded to spend most of the 33-day war in the hamlets and cities of South Lebanon inside Hezbollah's community. That's where I met a lot of the characters that ended up making the narrative of my book. I spent the war with them, and then I came back for the better part of the next 3 years and hung out with nurses and scout leaders, teachers, and college students, the sort of nuts and bolts folks who make Hezbollah tick.
That's interesting. And they didn't have an issue with you? They're like, oh, here comes, Mr. American over here, strolling his way into Hezbollah headquarters. No problems?
Well, let's be clear. I was not strolling into Hezbollah headquarters, and Hezbollah headquarters was not very receptive to any access at all to foreign journalists. So I did not get cooperation from Hezbollah officially while working on this book, and I did not get interviews with their top leader, Hassan Nasrallah. That being said, the rank and file folks, what I call the soccer moms of Hezbollah, who I spent these years with, they trusted me, and we formed the relationships we did because of that time we spent together during the war. Essentially, they saw me facing the same dangers they were during the time of conflict, and that meant to them that whatever I was, whatever they might not like about me, they figured I wasn't a spy, or I wouldn't have been running that kind of risk, and I wasn't someone. I was someone who, at the very least, they could trust on some gut human level.
Did they ask you about your ethnicity?
They did, and I'm Greek. My parents are both Greek, and that was something that came up. And I think, to some extent, that was to my advantage because I was enough of an outsider that I could keep my repertorial distance, and at the same time, they know Greeks, they know Greek Orthodox Christians from inside Lebanon, and it's sort of let's say a harmless ethnicity to have.
That's a funny way of putting it. I like that. So now you're saying things that are, I think, probably perfectly sensible in the real world, but in American politics is kind of verboten. Soccer moms and Hezbollah, aren't they all supposed to be terrorists?
Well, the bottom line is this is a huge, growing, popular movement. Whatever it is they believe, and there's lots of things they believe that we don't like, and that are problems for U.S. foreign policy, and that are even problems for other Lebanese. So, setting aside for a minute their potentially problematic platforms and goals as an organization, Hezbollah is huge, it's growing, it's popular, and it's here to stay. We've seen them expand for 3 decades now. They're as a party, they're a legitimate part of Lebanese politics, and they are the dominant party at the ballot box. They've been part of the government since 1992, and in so many spheres beyond their militia organization, they are involved in Lebanese governance. And so the United States recognizes that, and Israel recognizes that, although they're not exactly sure as governments how to deal with Hezbollah's presence and staying power. They have de facto acknowledged that Hezbollah is here to stay.
How many people are in Hezbollah?
Well, that's a sort of dicey question because part of Hezbollah's success is that it's happy to have support from folks who don't fit into its own mold. So the best way I think of to explain it is to sort of think of it like old line Communist Party movements, where the actual party membership is very small, but the party's political organization and support can be quite broad. In the case of Hezbollah, what that means is their militia numbers maybe just a few thousand, and their inner core of members, people who are actually Hezbollah members, vetted by the party, employed by the party, 100% instructed by the party, numbers in the tens of thousands. But their community of supporters numbers more than 1 million, and that community includes folks like Durgam, a former drug dealer I met who supports Hezbollah's resistance platform, but he drinks, he sins, he's not a particularly Islamic guy, all the way up to the pious religious parents of martyrs who, again, themselves are not members of Hezbollah, but whose every activity, from weekend scouts to baking for the mosque on Friday, is in the service of Hezbollah.
We're talking to Thanasis Cambanis. He's a New York Times correspondent, and he wrote "Privileged to Die" inside Hezbollah's legions and their endless war against Israel. So now, then, is it fair to say that the idea that everybody who's in Hezbollah or associates themselves with Hezbollah in one way or another, to call them all terrorists, is that absurd?
Well, I mean, I personally think that it really confuses the issue if you use general and vague language and labeling. So, somebody who actually conducts an attack against civilians for political purposes, that's the definition of terrorism. So, someone who drives a suicide bomb car into a crowd of civilians is a terrorist. I'm not sure how helpful it is to apply that same label to a cigarette importer-exporter who gives part of his annual religious tithe to a charity affiliated with Hezbollah. Those two individuals are doing very different things, and I also think when it comes to understanding Hezbollah as a movement, again, it's not restricted to its militia activity. It's not restricted to violent activity. Most of what they do is governing and social service provision. And in the case of Hezbollah, in fact, unlike a lot of other movements in the region, they've worked for the better part of 20 years now to try and shed the terrorist label with varying success. But it's worth noting that most European governments have continued diplomatic relations with Hezbollah, and have not put Hezbollah on their terror lists.
But they're on the U.S. terror list.
They're on the U.S. terror list, correct.
Right. You mentioned health care in there. Do they provide health care for the people in their communities?
They provide a lot of services, and a lot of them are not directly administered by the party. So, for example, health care, what we have is hospitals that are funded and governed by charitable institutions. The charitable institutions some of them are Iranian with Lebanese branches, some of them are distinctly Lebanese, and they are the ones who run the hospitals and the schools. Now, their leadership and members and staff are Hezbollah members, so it's quite clear that these are Hezbollah schools and Hezbollah hospitals, but administratively they're set up by these foundations, which have a lot of varying different sorts of funding. A lot of them collect money from diaspora Lebanese or wealthy Lebanese who simply give 10% or 20% of their income to charity and direct them to these foundations, and these are a big part of Hezbollah's infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm kind of amused by the idea that here in the United States we don't provide health care for the population. But Hezbollah is like, come on, we have to be decent human beings. They provide health care.
Well, I mean, part of what gave rise to Hezbollah was the failure and collapse of the Lebanese state. I mean, this is a country that, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist in 1975. Since then, I would say at best it's the shell of a state. At worst, it's a completely failed state. So when Hezbollah came into being, most of the Shiites in Lebanon, they didn't have access to sewage, they didn't have good roads, they didn't have public schools, they had nothing. So a big part of Hezbollah's ideology was to uplift its Shia constituents, and it viewed, part and parcel of its mission of to Israel was to keep its community healthy and thriving. And you can't organize an effective guerrilla war you don't have educated foot soldiers and educated supporters, and if you don't have the people, the engineers and the doctors and the nurses and so on to make a place work. And so they've taken these missions on from day one.
Is it true that they are promoting, and I'm getting this from your material, they promote safe sex?
Yes, I mean, one of the odd things to a Western ear or Western eye is how sort of modern they are in terms of things like sex education or family matters. So they talk to their fighters about safe sex. They talk to their fighters about being sexually responsible, because they know that that these men are going to be having relations with people. They also know that family life and marriage is complicated, and especially in a society where they're encouraging people to fight to the death in this war against Israel. They know that there are psychological repercussions to that. So one of the things that surprised me was to learn that Hezbollah's Martyrs Foundation sends social workers and psychiatrists to visit the parents of martyrs and the children of martyrs after they have after they lose someone in the war, and they openly counsel them to deal with depression and to deal with the sort of normal grieving process. And that's something that I certainly didn't encounter in Gaza or Iraq among the Islamist movements there.
It's interesting because, I mean, with the promotion of safe sex, along with the other things you're talking about, it seems Christine O'Donnell and some of our other Christian right in this country are to the right of Hezbollah, at least on that issue.
Well, I mean, I think one can take the parallel too far, and really, it's much more fair to look at Hezbollah in its own context, which is contemporary Lebanon, and that's both more useful and more interesting. Lebanon is a cosmopolitan place. It's got a third Christian, roughly a third Sunni Muslim, a third Shia Muslim. And in that context, what's interesting is that Hezbollah has decided it's willing to accept the sort of devout, diehard religious fundamentalists, and it's also willing to accept the guys like, my acquaintance Durgam, who goes to the strip club, and essentially to say, okay, in this society we have all kinds of people. We don't like all of them equally, but we're willing to like their support equally. And that's what's made them grow when other Islamist movements have demanded total fundamentalist devotion. Hezbollah has said, okay, that's what we want from our inner core, but the rest of you, give us whatever you're willing to give us.
It's kind of like a big tent, if you will.
Yeah.
So what percentage of the Lebanese parliament is Hezbollah?
They control roughly a third of the parliament and a third of the ministries. And again, this is another interesting thing. In terms of votes, their coalition wins about half of the votes. But they organize it in such a way that their minor supporting parties take a lot of the seats and therefore take a lot of the direct responsibility for governance. So the Christian Free Patriotic Movement of General Aoun runs a lot of the ministries on behalf of Hezbollah, and even though Hezbollah got far more votes than the Free Patriotic Movement, Hezbollah has essentially asked its Christian partners to act as a regent for it in a lot of the ministries, and that serves two purposes. One, it makes other Lebanese less alarmed, so they're afraid of a Hezbollah takeover, and Hezbollah can basically say, look, we want half the votes roughly, but we're not going to take half the power. And the other thing it does is it allows the Lebanese government to keep dealing with the West, with the United States. We won't deal with a minister from Hezbollah, but we will deal as a government with a minister from Hezbollah's coalition, as long as he's not a party member.
So, I mean, you've got political compromise there. You've got a lot of practicality. They're being very practical, in how they deal with this. Now, all of this, but at the same time, they still want to destroy Israel, right?
Yeah, and that's something that all the sort of humanizing of Hezbollah that I do in this book doesn't, in no way masks what is at root of a very extremist ideology. If you take Hezbollah at its word, and if you look at its platform and the speeches of its leaders, one of their main planks is as they put it, the total liberation of Palestine. In other words, the elimination of a Jewish state from the territory that is Palestine. That is a maximalist and extreme position, and it's one that really doesn't open up a lot of doors for political discussion and compromise. In practice, there's always the possibility of the kind of tense and grudging coexistence that we see around the world in lots of places where people hate each other's guts but are willing to live side by side. But at least in terms of their doctrine, they've really taken this, a very total position here, and frankly, it's one of the things that motivates a lot of its followers and a lot of its audience.
So, of course, the question then arises is, how real is that, right? Because they seem to be very practical in other respects. Is this a negotiation ploy? Like, hey, you know what, we're not going to give up the fact that we're not going to recognize Israel, we're not going to say we're not going to destroy Israel until, we get X or Y? Or do you think, no, the electorate of Hezbollah and the leadership think, no, one day we're going to win and we're going to destroy it?
I have to say, I've been convinced by my years in Hezbollah's community that they mean it. This is not a rhetorical position. They really believe that the Arab world made a mistake when it tried to accommodate Israel, and they really believe that Israel can be defeated by force. A lot of them believe that the apocalypse is coming in their lifetime as well, so that might help put it in perspective. Nonetheless, they put their money where their mouth is, and you see this. I saw this earlier in September when I went back to South Lebanon and saw villages like Bint Jbeil and Ait Shab, which have only now been fully rebuilt from the destruction of 2006. Already, the inhabitants of these towns are talking about the next war, and I wouldn't say they're eager for it, but nor would I say that they're hoping to avoid it. I mean, they expect it. They're
going to beat Israel with what army? With whose army?
With weapons they got from Iran and with their own determination and perseverance.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Of course not. But
by the way, really bad luck. I don't want that to happen.
I mean, look, the thing that makes them different, though, is that here are these folks, and they're willing to do it again and again. I mean, the guy I interviewed in the front yard of his house that was a pile of rubble 4 years ago, and he's ready to see it reduced to rubble again now. That's unusual. I mean, that's unusual in the region, and it's what makes them a persistent problem.
Well, that sets up the unsolvable question, if you will. At least it's unsolvable in my mind, but let's talk it through, see if we can come up with something. I mean, we're talking to Thanasis Cambanis. His new book is A Privilege to Die, and he's a New York Times correspondent. So on the one hand, they are real people, of course. I'm not the right-wing ideologues say, they're all scary terrorists, etc. That's crazy. There's nurses, there's this, there's that, as you explained. It's, they want half the votes in Lebanon. And I believe in, even if they're your enemy, and talking to your enemy and negotiating and maybe finding some sort of common ground, etc. On the other hand, they really do want to destroy Israel. So how do you deal with that? I mean, how do you deal with people who in their mind think, no, I'm coming, and we plan to do something that you don't like at all, but at the same time, they're a real entity there on the ground. So what do you do?
Well, I mean, what the rest of Lebanese political parties have done, and what a lot of America's European allies, including Britain, have done, is they have relations with Hezbollah, and they do several things. They try to, as they see it, talk sense into Hezbollah. They try and collect more information about things Hezbollah wants that maybe we'd be willing to give them in exchange for, if not disarmament, for, truces or behaving more the way the West wants it to behave. And at the end of the day, there are some things that can be negotiated and talked about, like prisoner trades or short-term truces or simply governance, matters of getting, trying to reincorporate Shia Lebanon into the rest of Lebanon in the hopes that eventually it is a functional state and the sort of freedom for some movement like Hezbollah to govern on its own, is countered. But I think we have to acknowledge that with circumstances the way they are today, Hezbollah has a lot of incentives to go to war, every 5 or 10 years. I mean, without a war with Israel, it loses its identity as an Islamist resistance group, and so we're facing a party that structurally it needs the sort of regeneration that it gets and the new political credit it gets from war.
But certainly we would take the wind out of their sails if there was an actual real peace deal that both sides agreed to, don't you think?
Right, but I mean, the problem Hezbollah has with Israel is very different, and I would say far more limited than, say, the problem between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and that is if the Palestinians and the Israelis made peace, then it would be very hard, I think, for Hezbollah to say, well, we're going to keep fighting the Israelis, and we don't even live in the same country; we live next door. I don't think we see that happening very soon. So, Hezbollah, I think, isn't going to have to deal with that contradiction in the near future.
All right, and real quick here, I wanted to get the distinction between Hezbollah and Hamas. How do you think Hamas is different?
I mean, the biggest difference is this: that Hezbollah's been around in governance, taking care of its own people for nearly 3 decades, and so it's had to moderate and improvise in a lot of ways that that Hamas still hasn't even been tested in. I think in 15, 20, 30 years, we might see Hamas having evolved to the place Hezbollah is today, but not yet.
So Hamas is more fundamentalist, more...
Hamas is simply untested in power. Hamas only since it took over Gaza a few years ago has had to actually deal with the thorny contradictions of governing and taking care of its people as opposed to simply being a militant party outside of power.
And are Hamas and Hezbollah both getting weapons from Iran or no?
Hamas, I don't know in great detail, but from what I hear from my Israeli sources, to a far lesser extent than Hezbollah. Hezbollah openly gets its funding and weapons from Iran to a great extent. So it's a whole it's an open strategic partnership.
All right, Thanasis Kambanis, obviously a very interesting book, A Privilege to Die. Very objective coverage of Hezbollah, both sides, of the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. Thank you so much for joining us. A really interesting conversation.
Thanks a lot. Great to be with you.
All right. Young Turks.